my friend. You're not ready. And the other guy, ready? Okay. We start to count. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Greetings. And welcome to a very special takeover edition by Mr. Saturday Night and Cosmo on the Lot Radio and Worldwide FM. I'm Colleen Cosmo Murphy, and joining me is...
This is Eamon Harkin from Mr. Saturday Night.
And we're set up to do a really interesting show. The first hour, I'm going to interview Eamon about his kind of musical club inspirations and a little bit of his story about dance music and how he got involved in clubs and vice versa.
Right, yeah. I'll attempt to do the same in the second hour. I don't know if I'll do as good a job as you do, Colleen, but we'll give it a shot.
Sounds good. So let's wind back to Northern Ireland, where you grew up. What got you into music in terms of dance music?
Well, you know, it took me a while to actually get into dance music. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in a place called Derry in the northwest of Northern Ireland, and
it's not necessarily a place known for its like pump and club life, is it?
Not really. I mean, yes and no. Like generally no, but then there was these sort of like big clubs. There was a place called Kelly's in Portrush, which is kind of like a seaside town, like north of Derry, that was like a huge kind of like house and trance club. And you know, for some reason, like that kind of like housey trance sound has always been quite big in Ireland, and I actually think that kind of was really off-putting to me to begin with.
Of course, yeah.
So when I was first getting into music, it was all guitar music, kind of grunge. It was the time of grunge,
yeah.
Right? So like all the bands,
all the sub pop bands from Seattle and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, Derry, there was just a scene in Derry trying to copy that, myself included, very very badly. But you know, one of the like formative experiences when I was in the equivalent of high school was they would send you out on work experience, and there was a place in Derry called the Nerve Centre where I think it was kind of like a non-profit sort of semi-government funded place for young people to like learn about music, and John O'Neill from the Undertones worked there, and so I asked to do something in music and they sent me there for a week, and I just like followed him around and he told me all about the music industry.
That's
and
amazing.
Like
told me about a like really good mentor.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a very short mentorship, but it was really exciting and opened my eyes to like one path in music that wasn't commercial success, right? Because at this time it was kind of like you'd watch sort of Top of the Pops at home, and you sort of made it, or it wasn't clear what happened to you if you didn't get on Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
So anyway, that really like made me think more about different possibilities, and then it wasn't until I moved to London. I went to university in London. It wasn't
Where did
until
you
I
go
went
in London? Which university?
UCL, University College London, to study engineering, because I was still like trying to be like responsible and sensible, and like, you know, still thinking I had to get a proper job and all of that. But being in London and being surrounded by a version of dance music that wasn't commercial trance music, like really opened my eyes to the other possibilities.
And which years were you in London?
So I was in London from 95 to 2003.
Okay, so we crossed over a bit because I moved there in 1999. So which clubs
Right.
and parties were you going to?
So I would go to Errol Alkin's Trash.
Oh, that was
at
great.
the end on Monday nights, and
Yep.
as a student, like Mondays were, you could go out Monday to 4 o'clock in the morning. It was fine.
Yeah,
you know?
that's absolutely fine.
Giles Peterson's parties at Dingwall's in Camden, and the original Plastic People on Oxford Street.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Ade's place.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
which was really, really great. And then just Fabric was like, in the early days of Fabric, going
Early
there
days of
all the
Fabric
time.
were fantastic. It was
Yeah.
like the best big club in London.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And programmed so well.
Yeah. And the crowd is really, really great. So that was like kind of the days when James Lavelle was a was a resident.
I'm actually doing an event with James Lavelle and
really?
yeah, in London on Tuesday.
Did you watch that documentary?
I
about
haven't
him?
yet. I
Yeah,
really
it's
need to, don't
really,
I?
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
He's an interesting bloke, that's
Yeah,
for sure.
he's been through many twists
He
and turns.
sure has.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Jukes, your song's about to run out. Is there a song that you want to play that's kind of reminiscent of those London days? Something that was really important to you?
Yes. So, in amongst the mix, one of the things I haven't mentioned is that as I was getting into dance music, I was a little put off by the sort of commercial, sort of dance music, sort of thing that I was seeing, and so DJs that didn't necessarily play dance music were quite appealing to me, and hence going to see Errol at Trash. But Optimo were also huge inspiration for me at that time, and
Very creative DJs.
yeah, and I've learned so much from them, in many regards, in terms of like DJing, putting on parties, promoting, and just learned a lot about music from them. And so I'd always go and see them in London, and my sister was in drama school in Glasgow, so I'd go and see her and go to Optimo. And just the experience of going to those parties as a regular Sunday party were also quite...
And Glasgow's a
Quite
great
sort of
music city.
amazing
It's
music
such
city.
a great music city, and
Yeah.
it has such a great vibe. In fact, I would say Glasgow reminds me more of Brooklyn. And every time I would go to Glasgow, I mean, just even seeing the brownstones and all
Yeah.
that, there was a certain kind of a likeness there. But it was actually the attitude of the people.
Right.
Because I had moved from Brooklyn to the UK to London, and then I'd go up to play in Glasgow, and I always just really got on really well with the Glaswegians.
Yeah. Oh, I love going to Glasgow. It actually reminds me a little bit of Derry, where I'm from, as well.
Celtic vibe.
Yeah, there's a real kind of like no nonsense sort of spirit. You know, it's a real blue collar working class town, but yet at the same time, you know, they know what's good. They know their music. And I just think that's a great combination.
Well, let me play something from Optimo then.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to play a track called Flextone by Liquid Liquid, which is obviously a New York band from the sort of 70s and 80s.
So we're previewing that New York connection coming up.
But it's a JD Twitch edit.
Nice.
That he did for Rush Hour. It's quite old, actually. It's probably like 15 years old, but it's a great track.
Great,
So
let's put it
cue it up.
on. you both moved to the UK about the same time, about 1999.
Right.
So now we're going to talk about you leaving the UK and going to the Big Apple. So what was it that drew you here?
Well, it was a job actually that was not related to music. You know, I went and did the like serious, sensible degree at university, and then transitioned into the sensible, serious job doing computer programming and web design.
Oh my goodness.
And like, you know, did that for a number of years. And it was fine, but it was, you know, it wasn't really that exciting to me.
Fulfilling for you.
And you know, at the same time I was buying records and I was doing small parties around East London and just sort of continuing to like, you know, satiate that interest in music. And then I got offered a job in New York with a visa. And
Lucky you. That's
Yes.
gold dust.
Absolutely, and I think I just was like, well, you know, I don't really have, you know, I've got friends and family here, but I'm young and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do. So why don't I just do this and see where it goes? So I moved here in 2003 and didn't know anybody other than the people I was working with. So kind of put a lot of energy into going out and going to parties. And had always had a really like romantic vision of New York.
Of course, as does everybody.
As does everybody. As do many Irish people in particular.
Yeah, because that whole, well, you know my name, so you can tell. Well, I'm from the Boston Irish,
Right,
not
right.
the New York Irish, but
Yes.
there is a relationship that's gone on for 150 years
Yeah,
or so.
exactly. It's been good to the Irish.
Yeah.
And so just this idea of like going to New York was just hugely exciting, and going to the place where all this music that I loved and was a big part of my life was from was just amazing. So I came here and threw myself into that. But weirdly, I came, you know, 18 months after 9/11, when Giuliani had really like completed the job of closing all the clubs. So it was actually a little perplexed as to, you know, why the scene wasn't bigger. I mean, there was still cool stuff going on, but it was harder to find. But it was still an amazing place to be in. It was still a real adventure for me. So it just, you know, got into it.
But I think that's kind of interesting what you said about Giuliani, because I left after he was, you know, starting to kind of decimate the whole club scene here and the cabaret license and everything else. But what I found when I came back in the early noughties, when you had arrived here, is that there was a certain amount of daring do. I mean, there's a whole DIY ethos that, and people migrated to Brooklyn and they started throwing their own parties. And it's
Right.
just absolutely incredible, because it just kind of got away from the whole commercial aspect of clubs and parties and made it more underground again, and but much more DIY and a lot more fun.
Right. Well, I think ultimately the state of things was that kind of sort of assessment of things being a little in a weird place, and a lot of things having been shut down and sort of died off. When I met Justin, that was kind of one of the things that we bonded over. It was like, well, what's going on here? This is New York City. We're supposed to have the most amazing, vibrant, dynamic nightlife, and it's a little tricky to find that right now. And there was no clubs to do parties in, and the clubs that were still around were frankly difficult to work with. And so that really spurred us to like go into lofts and go into yard spaces and rooftops and warehouses and all of that, and just started from scratch, like literally every aspect, from, you know, running the bar, hiring the bartenders, loading in the speakers, the whole thing.
I know all about that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it was, so there was a real, and obviously we weren't the only people doing it, but the people that were doing parties, most of them had to do that. So it really felt like there was a lot of starting from scratch.
Well, why don't we pick up on that after we play another song? I see you have something from UR queued up, which
Yes.
is funny because I almost picked a UR track as
Oh.
well because absolutely just massive for me. So
Well,
tell us about what you
I mean,
picked.
just the music of Detroit generally is just so important to me as a DJ. Just the output from that city over the years is just phenomenal, and yeah, kind of lost for words for how
Exactly.
amazing it is. But I love UR in particular, and I think my love affair with the music of New York came first, and then that sort of led to my interest in the music of Detroit. But I picked this track because I think it really exemplifies how melodic UR can be, which is not necessarily. People that know UR know that they can be melodic, but people that
Like
maybe
high
don't.
tech jazz and everything.
Yeah, but
yeah.
maybe some people think of them as being a little like militant and hard and
Yeah.
and rough, and I love how how melodic this track is, but also it's got the funk in a huge way, which like only these guys can do. I
That
think.
dark Detroit funk.
Right,
Right.
exactly. So it's a track called Wind Chime.
Excellent. Well, you're listening to Eamon Harkin and Colleen Cosmo Murphy on a Cosmodelica Mr. Saturday Night Takeover on the Lot Radio and Worldwide FM.
A record was released on Warp Records in 1990. So it was actually a little before my time, but I picked it because, like, at that time when I was living in London, like, their records and, like, that sound was so prevalent. And it, you know, that record I would have heard many times on the system at Fabric, so it was like, I would generally go to Fabric on Fridays rather than Saturdays, because it had a little bit more of a sort of a diverse flow.
It wasn't just as house and techno kind of oriented.
Yeah, like Room 2 was always drum and bass with guys on the mic, and like the energy in that room and like the sweat and the heat coming out of that room was just, it felt so London. It felt really like that was the only place you would get that experience.
Right.
And then Room 3 would have been like, you know, pretty kind of like broken beat.
I was really into that scene.
Yeah. So
There
yeah.
you have it. There you have it. So let's back up now. We were talking when you met Justin. You started throwing your own parties, and what was it like in the early '90s, throwing parties in Brooklyn and creating things? I mean, it must have had a lot of challenges to kind of like figure out how to do this pretty much from scratch.
Yes. I mean, I'll give credit to Justin really sort of paving the way for us, because before he and I had done things together, he had done a number of loft parties. And he was like, this is what we should do. We shouldn't keep trying to work with clubs where we can't have a working relationship around the important things. It was very much sort of a business conversation, and then when you try to have a conversation about how security should interact with customers, and
that's a good point as
drink
well.
prices.
Very important, as I always say. First people to greet the dancer.
Absolutely. So I was like, okay, that all makes sense. Let's do it. So you know, we bought a sound system, and we just went out looking for these spaces.
I love it.
And you know, almost all the parties were illegal because there was no way of doing a legal party.
I think I went to one actually, because I'd come over, and I think it was Afrika Bambaataa. And I remember being so blown away by the attention to detail, because it was some warehouse in Brooklyn. I took a taxi and I didn't know where I was going. And I went by myself as well. And, you know, they had someone holding a torch, a flashlight on the stairs so people wouldn't fall down. I was like, and it stuck with me.
Right, yeah.
That was like a really high, you know, it was like a very good attention to detail that was very important for the safety of the people. And I felt the security were really nice as well. So well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Well, you know, I mean, I can't say that I was ever super comfortable with having to do parties that way, but we were so passionate about doing something that we accepted those risks. But we always tried to be super responsible within the context of what we were working with. So I think that's a really good example. We were like, okay, the people coming to this party have got to go up this step and there's no light. So like your job, Mr. Security Guard, is to make sure that there's a light on these steps and nobody falls down and like hurts themselves. So yeah.
Well, I'm gonna let you cue up another record, and but when we come back, I'd love to talk to you about nowadays, because I think that's how this is all kind of culminated. And this is Colleen, Cosmo Murphy, and Eamon Harkin on Worldwide FM and the Lot Radio with a Mr. Saturday Night and Cosmodelica takeover.
This is Psychic Vampire. 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 This
second from Mr. Saturday Night and myself, Colleen Cosmo Murphy from Cosmodelica. And we were chatting before how you and Justin were throwing these kind of illegal parties, but as we know, how the nature, how urban development happens when a creative kind of presence takes place in a neighborhood, that's when things start to get gentrified. And when I moved away, I used to live in Brooklyn in the 80s and the 90s. And then when I came back from London so many years later, I was shocked to see Williamsburg, like, oh my gosh, what's happened over here? And just the whole kind of transformation of Brooklyn, which is still absolutely amazing. But it's definitely changed, and it seems like promoters had to kind of go a bit more above board.
Yeah, I mean, the story of gentrification in Brooklyn has been kind of astounding over the last 10 years. And, I think it's a really complicated topic.
It is.
We first and foremost, we are gentrifiers, right?
Yeah.
Like we go to neighborhoods that have the kind of space that allows us to do our thing in terms of parties and make a ton of noise without being noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that for long enough, like other artists who do interesting things in these parts of cities like New York, and this is obviously a global phenomenon at this point, it attracts further waves of different people coming to do things, and then ultimately real estate people, and before you know it, there's sort of luxury condos everywhere. So it's very much this like sort of continuum, sort of continual process that you find yourself somewhere along that line, and so for us, we went to places and found ourselves having to move on because of
noise complaints, and
actually not so much noise complaints, but just like the nature of big real estate. So we were at the spot in Gowanus where we did the original Mr. Sunday, and then that got sold to a big property developer to build a big luxury condo complex. And then we moved to Industry City, which is this massive complex down by the water in Sunset Park, that was starting to undergo a massive sort of real estate transformation strategy by a fairly large corporate group. And they were happy to have us there to begin with because we made it cool.
Yeah.
But then they made it clear to us that we weren't
no longer welcome.
They weren't going to let us do anything long term because I think they had their sights set on bigger fish. So at that point, we decided that we needed to take matters into our own hands if we wanted to continue to do this. And so we started looking for space that we could go into on a longer term basis, and we spent a number of years looking, and we eventually found the property that where Nowadays is, and took a 10-year lease on it, which was a big piece of paper to sign.
I'm sure.
Really lost a lot of sleep over making that decision, and then just threw ourselves into the project that was and is building Nowadays to be kind of hub of dance music culture in New York.
I only hear good things about it.
Well, thank you. It's we're super happy with how it's going. It's been a lot of work, but it's so rewarding to see what we're doing sort of really scale and expand and directions that really go way beyond anything to do with Mr. Saturday Night or Mr. Sunday, with really working with the broader community of DJs and artists that exist in New York, and working to provide a platform for their thing.
Good.
And that's been the best part.
Yeah, it's that sense of community, isn't it?
Yeah.
And support of the community. I think that's wonderful.
It's really cool. And it's hard in New York because New York's a very competitive city, and everybody.
Really? I never knew that.
I don't need to tell you that. And so everybody, everybody's hustling and everybody's got their
Yeah.
thing going on, and you're sitting down and you're trying to work together, and there's a lot of sort of competing forces at play. But I really think that we've got like a strong sort of hub right now of people coming through and doing cool things, and we just try and stay focused on that.
Yeah.
Because I think everything else falls into place once you've got.
Well, I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I really applaud you. I really do. And I
Thank
think
you
what
very
you and
much.
Justin have done is really incredible. I love that DIY kind of spirit. It's like, hey, if it ain't happening, we're just going to make it. And I just really think that's absolutely wonderful. So
Thank you.
well done, you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I guess we'll start with one of a tune that really inspired me from my early days of going out to parties in New York.
Hey, this is Eamon Hargan from Mr. Saturday Night on the Lot Radio, and I'm very happy to have Colleen Cosmo Murphy in the house as our special guest. Colleen has just interviewed me for the last hour, and I will attempt to do somewhat of a similar job to her. She's got way more experience at this radio game than I do. So welcome.
Thank
Colleen.
you.
Great
Thank
to have
you.
So this is Dexter Wansel, Life on Mars, which is a big Loft classic, right?
It is a very big Loft classic, and it's one of those songs when I first went into the Loft, I think it was in the early 90s. I still don't know the year. Could have been 91.
Who cares?
Who knows?
Yeah.
In any case, I remember I was more of a, I was into psychedelic rock, and I was into indie stuff, and I was into electronic music as well, but I hadn't really heard that kind of like psychedelic soul before. And it just, when I heard that song, I remember running out to my friend John Hall and saying, "What is this? What is this?" And it was just one of those records that really stuck with me because it had all these kinds of emotions and this kind of cosmic sensibility and this funk and this psychedelia that really just intrigued me. But it, is kind of heady at the same time, quite physical as well. So that's the kind of music that I really love to dance to, something that has a few different levels. It was produced in 1976. And yeah, I just absolutely love that song. And it's one of the songs, if I didn't want to repeat myself, I would play it every single party that I play at.
Right.
But
Well, I mean,
I try to hold myself back.
it's a phenomenal record. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think many people would complain about hearing that song at every single
I know.
party. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did put it on the Loft compilations that David and I produced. So that
Right.
it was it's just such a. I just said we have to get that record on there. It's
Right.
just absolutely wonderful.
So we talked in the first hour a lot about my journey to New York from Ireland via London, and in some ways you've kind of had like the reverse
I know.
journey.
We were like waving to each other in the plane over the
planes.
Atlantic.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your early days in New York?
Okay.
Because that was a time that like I didn't come to New York until 2003 for the first time. So I'm always very curious about people's experiences of like the 80s and the 90s in New York. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I moved here in 1986. I went to NYU, and it was the week that I turned 18, actually, that I moved to New York City. And as I'm standing here at the Lot Radio on this beautiful New York City afternoon in Brooklyn, I'm looking over seeing the Manhattan skyline, and I'm seeing the Empire State Building, where I used to work when I was in university
wow.
on weekends at 19 years old, and I was taking photos, those cheesy kind of portraits of, the Empire State Building backdrop. I did that, and I also did make keychains, pressed pennies, and made them into keychains. That's what I did, and I can just see the Empire
it
State
is,
Building
right
right there. And
yeah.
it was beautiful because some nights I was sitting there on my own with the clouds around and all the lights coming up. It felt like it was my castle in the middle of Manhattan. Any case, New York City was a very different time back then. It was wonderful. It was still very creative. I think New York City's always creative, but this is pre-Giuliani days. You have the pre, during, and post-Giuliani.
Right.
Made such a mark on New York City. And you still had the vestiges of really cool downtown culture. A lot of it had moved to Williamsburg by then, so you had a lot of the artists had already moved out of New York City, of Manhattan proper. Although the Lower East Side and Alphabet City, it still was Alphabet City. And I came along, I was really inspired by music, and I had done radio in high school and worked in record shops. So when I came here from Massachusetts, it was just an amazing kind of playground for me. And, I used to go to places like CBGB's and Tramps, and I was much more into that kind of the indie kind of scene, post-punk scene. I was on WNYU. I did several radio shows, including psychedelic 60s radio shows, Krautrock, New Afternoon Show, which was more of a kind of like the current, we didn't have the word alternative music at that time. So I would just say underground music.
Right.
And In the early 90s, I found myself going to David Mancuso's loft party. I mean, I had been to a lot of clubs like Tracks and different places, and I always had a good time. But it wasn't something that changed my life, where I thought, okay, I must collect this music, I must play this music, I must, get into this scene. But with the loft and David's party, I really felt it was a whole transformation, as it is for so many other people.
Right.
And
so what specifically was different?
Oh my
about
gosh.
that first experience versus the other places you've been going to like enjoy and consume music?
Well, I think the whole psychedelia meets dance music thing was a big thing for me because I was into psychedelic rock. I had a radio show called Plastic Tales from the Marshmallow Dimension. Quite embarrassing, I know. But in any case,
It's a great name.
in any case, so the sensibility was there. It was a sense of community, a safe space. I went with a friend of mine, my friend who is no longer with us, by the name of Adam Goldstone. And he brought me there for the first time. I actually didn't live too far away. And I started going on my own after that. And I felt completely safe doing that as a, very young 22-year-old woman. Mm-hmm. And 22, 23. And the sound system as well was the other thing for me. I had studied sound. I was producing syndicated radio shows at the time. I was engineering. I was editing tape. I was on that kind of sound, the recording side of sound and the mixing side of sound, but not on the reproduction side of sound. And I had never heard records played over a system like that before. And it really was quite a magical experience, including this one that we're listening to right now. I have to say, this is one of the records, when I listen to it, it can almost... Just talking about it can make me well up, but it brings me back to those days on 3rd Street, to David's place.
What record is this?
This is Code 718 Equinox, the Heavenly Club mix. It was produced by Danny Tenaglia, has keys by Peter Dow. Danny was doing so much great work, and Peter Dow, of course, they were collaborating a lot, and Danny had that beautiful kind of sense of soulfulness, with this beautiful melodic keys by Peter Dow and a certain sense of toughness as well with the beats. And of course, it samples Manuel Gottschalk's E2, E4. And like so many other records, like Suena Latino and so many other records have, because it's a great, it's a great improv that Manuel did. So I hear this and I can just close my eyes and just picture myself in the middle of David's dance floor on East 3rd Street.
Awesome. Should we listen to it?
Yeah, let's listen to it.
So if I'm not mistaken, this is Plastic Dreams by JD.
You know this track? You heard it before?
I may have heard this track, but I never ever tire of hearing this track.
I know, exactly.
We just set it off, Mike. The shuffle when it comes in for the first time.
It's a fun track to dance to. It's a
Oh.
great track for the dancers because it's not just that fourth, like doom, doom, doom.
Right.
So it's a really fun track to dance to. And it's so interesting because the first time I heard it was at the shelter.
Oh,
And I had been
okay.
out all night. I don't know where I'd been. I could have been at the Loft before. I could have been at Save the Robots. I could have done my kind of club migration from place to place and then party to party. But I ended up at the shelter, and Timmy Regisford, of course, was playing. And I heard this track, and it didn't
So
sound.
Timmy played this.
Timmy played it
Right, okay.
twice.
Oh wow.
Twice. And both times I danced my ass off. I was just like, oh my! It's a song because the bass, the sounds, it's really psychedelic as well in an electronic kind of way. But because the drums are shuffly, it makes you dance and relax your body in a different way. And as DJs, we know when we're watching dancers, you have to kind of change tempos, you have to change the beat to make people relax into things and to dance in different ways.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just always the same kind of robotic kind of moves.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just an astounding track. And I remember it was a Sunday morning, I ended up going back home and waiting until 1 o'clock until all the record shops opened. I called all the record shops. Do you have this record? Do you have this record? And finally, 8 Ball, I think it was, had the last original RNS, last copy in New York City. And I went down and I snagged it, and that's still the record that I have today. And
Wow.
I just absolutely loved it. And it's just so great that Timmy Regisford played it, because it's not a track that you would
Right. It's
normally
a little
associate.
edgier
Yeah.
for like his more soulful house sounds.
Exactly,
Right, yeah.
because he was mainly playing a lot of Blaze kind of stuff in New Jersey stuff, which I loved, and all those gospel-y kind of vocals, those mid-90s vocals, and, really coming from the church, and really beautiful and wonderful, and of course the classics. And to hear him play this European import was quite something, and not only once, but twice.
Right.
So that it was a special moment.
That's awesome. One thing I'm really curious about with respect to that time period was how it felt to be dancing through into the morning in New York, because right now I think we've got a very vibrant and strong scene, which is great. We're all very grateful for that, but we don't yet have that like experience of dancing through the night into the day, in the way that existed back in those
Oh,
days
it's
in
so
New York, and kind of
fun.
exists in other cities today.
Yeah,
So,
Berlin and
I-
Tokyo and yeah.
right, and I think about that and whether we can bring those days back. So how did it feel?
It was amazing because you'd take your disco nap, and you might go out at midnight or 2 in the morning, and you'd be out, and then you'd probably stay up the whole day then, and then crash on Sunday night, and then go to your job on Monday. But the records that you can play, as DJs or as musical hosts, they're different. You can play and experience and dance to music at 5 a.m. much differently than you can at 11 p.m. It's just the times of day, all these different circumstances influence how we enjoy music, whether we're the ones like, putting the records on or dancing to it on the dance floor. And I find those later hours, or the earlier hours, I should say, in this case, I think there's probably a certain sense of abandonment of the ego a bit more.
Right.
And I love that kind of winding down and that sense of freedom. So if you're playing records at 11, 12, you feel like you still have to be on that peak kind of high. I'm talking 11, 12 at night.
Right.
11 and 12 the next morning.
That's a whole different.
It's a
ballgame.
whole different ball game. Yeah, you can be playing like music from outer space, so
Right.
music from Sun Ra or the Orb or whatever. And I just love that kind of freedom. And I feel that when I go to Japan, because in Japan you can do a 9-hour set, a 12-hour set, and just go on and on and on, because the licensing laws are very different. And I'm very happy that I got to experience New York at
that
that
way.
time and in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. a couple years back, Justin and I finished the day at Panorama Bar, and we did a 9-hour set from midnight to 9 a.m. and it was a really amazing experience of playing in that way. And I think we've had a few experiences of doing it in New York when we were doing the illegal loft parties, where you can just keep going, but
because it's illegal anyways.
right, you've broken a few rules. Let's just keep breaking a few more.
Hey, just keep break some.
We're
Yeah,
on
break
a
some
roll.
more. Break some more.
But I think it's just a sort of like regular thing. It'd be really cool to have something like that.
Yeah, it would be. It really would be.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
So what have you got next for us?
Okay, well, let's move over to London then, shall
Okay,
we?
yes.
So I moved from New York City to London in 1999, and for various reasons, and partly Giuliani, I could say, was definitely part of this decision. I felt New York City was kind of going. Oh, the club scene, the party scene was really difficult. I mean, David was having his challenges with the loft parties as well. That should be said. But everybody was having their challenges. And it was just a very difficult time for having clubs and parties in New York City. And I was in a relationship at the time, and with a Brit. We decided to move to the UK. It's always a place that has kind of loomed large in my psyche. My grandmother was English, and she was a war bride. So it wasn't like completely out of the question for me to like move to the UK.
Right.
Also, I was a fan of English music and British music, not just English music, but British music growing up, especially from Manchester, it has to be said.
Course,
so,
yeah.
So I've always been a big fan of the UK music scene, and plus I also played a lot of imports. I worked at Dance Tracks in New York City, and we had a lot of great imports. I had radio shows here on WNYU during the 90s, and I think my radio shows were kind of different from other radio shows in that I did play a lot of the New York kind of deep underground house music, but I also turned to the UK as well, and to France, and to Japan as well. So I also played a lot of imports. So moving to the UK was a really great experience. I felt, dance music was much more embraced there. We did the Loft compilations with David on Newphonic at the same time. We did this in 1999 and 2000. And in 2003, we started a party, myself, Tim Lawrence, Jeremy Gilbert, Adrian Fillery, and Nikki Lucas started a party with David called Lucky Cloud. And this next track that I'm going to play is a song that David did play. One of the reasons I really love it is because it's from like an indie band, the Gorillaz, Damon Albarn from Blur. And it's a remix by DFA, James Murphy. And it was kind of melding these worlds that I really loved. And I'm so sad that I kind of missed that whole kind of DFA thing. So I moved here from 1999, and I love what James was doing because he was kind of crossing that indie kind of punk ethic with dance music, and those were like kind of two worlds that I really embraced that were uniting, and he really united very well. And I also think it is very psychedelic.
Absolutely.
So,
all right, let's hear it.
Let's have a listen.
He's coming up, 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 he's coming up. It's there. It's there. You've got the pressing on you.
Hello. So this is Eamon Hargan from Mr. Saturday Night with Colleen Cosmo Murphy. We're doing a special show, obviously here on the Lot Radio, but this show will also be broadcast on Colleen's show on Worldwide FM.
Yeah, Worldwide FM.
Colleen and I are playing a festival in London at the end of August.
Yeah, on my birthday.
On your birthday.
So,
you'll know the date,
tell
'cause I can't-
people where to send presents. No, it's August 24th.
August 24th.
Yeah. And it's called One Day at the Disco.
At the disco. Who else is playing on that?
You know, Inner City are doing a live set.
Okay,
Todd
yeah.
Terrier is also playing. Those are the names that I remember along with you.
Too Many DJs.
Are they playing as well?
Derek Carter. I think
Derek
is
Carter's playing as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, that's right.
So should be for those in London or those that will be in London at that time.
Yeah.
Should be a good day out. So we just listened to the DFA remix of Gorillas, which has relevancy to you because of its the manner it was played by David Mancuso at the Loft. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about
Well,
that?
yeah, I mean, he played it, I played it as well. A lot of my friends played it. But the thing that I really like about it is that it was kind of marrying the indie kind of rock, underground rock world with dance music in a very kind of psychedelic way. And I think what James Murphy was doing at that time, and still does, was really interesting. I'm quite sad that when I left New York is kind of when he was, started his rise to stardom. I mean, he was here around the same time, but he was like engineering different indie bands and stuff.
Right,
So he
yeah.
wasn't really on my radar at that point. So anytime a DFA mix was coming out in the early noughties, I was always checking out to see, what it sounded like. And it was always something that, kind of took things to a different level and a different heady space, which I really, really appreciated. And that on a great sound system sounds fabulous.
Oh yeah, for sure. So how did it go down at the Loft?
Well, at the Lucky Cloud party, I never heard it play. I never
you
heard
didn't play it?
David. No,
Okay,
I never heard
right.
David play at the Loft because I was already in the UK.
Right, of
So
course.
it's an anthem.
Right.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
anthem. Because I think also in Lucky Cloud, obviously there's slight differences between Lucky Cloud and the Loft. And even though David was the musical host for us until he stopped traveling, and he founded the party with us, and we had the similar ethos. The dance floor is obviously from a slightly different generation because David started his parties here in New York, nearly 50 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
And some of those people are still coming to the parties. Our party started in 2003, so
Right.
it's a different generation. So you have that. Different culture. I think both of us have, lived in two different continents and in two
Yeah.
different countries, so we understand how things in the UK are different to things in the USA.
Indeed. Yes.
And also, I just think also indie electronic music probably has a greater root in Europe in some sense than it does here in the USA. So the response in London was phenomenal. But I think you've heard it. I think you heard David play it here at the
Well,
Loft
yeah,
in New York.
we were just saying when it was playing off mic that I heard it. I heard David play it at the Loft, probably like 8 years ago. And you asked me,
What was the response?
what was the response? And I couldn't tell you because I was just so in my own head. With
That's where you should
with my
be.
own
That's
response.
good. Good answer. Good answer.
Because it sounded amazing and it was a real surprise for me to hear him play it because I wasn't expecting him to play
Good.
it.
And that's great.
And it was, it was awesome. It was really, 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 really great. But I'm curious how your experience of playing at the Loft versus Lucky Cloud has been over the years in terms of like being able to sort of introduce new music or like just the sort of response, the kind of response we're talking about with this track. Does it feel different?
I mean, David and I used to talk about this actually quite a bit. He used to say to me, "You and I are the only people that have played the London parties and New York parties and the parties in Japan." And we talked about how each of them were very different experiences. Number one being different times of day. So in Japan, like you're playing for my friend Satoru over in Fillmore North, when he had Fillmore North, he has with the whole Klipschorn setup. You could go to 9, 10, 11 in the morning, kind of like the old loft parties that David had in his own home when he didn't have to rent a place. And it was a very different aesthetic. Also, playing in Japan is a very different aesthetic. For me, as a culture, I lived in Japan in 1989, and I've always found that it's a culture that embraces craftsmanship. Perfection, subtlety, nuance, and there's a certain profoundness, a profundity, I suppose, that I haven't found in many other cultures. So there's a different experience playing there where I feel I could go very deep.
Right. Yeah.
In the UK, there's another different experience. People I found as a culture were more aware of underground music than as a culture in the USA. I was surprised when I moved there that you could hear very underground, what we would call underground house tunes that were coming out of New York were actually on Radio 1 there
Right.
and just
Yeah.
being broadcast, and people were listening to them in office buildings. So I was like,
or going to number one. in the
yeah,
charts.
exactly. I mean,
Right,
Masters
yeah.
at Work being number one. I mean, it was just astounding to me. So there's a very deep kind of rooted culture that where people, they understand that on a mass kind of level. And also there's that kind of whole indie crossover. My experiences here in New York, the thing that I love here in New York is there's a whole kind of melting pot of cultures. And, you had like African American dancers on the floor, Latino dancers on the floor, people, from Puerto Rican or Dominican Republic heritage, all different types of people, people from Japan, you had people like myself, and I felt just a much more of a melting pot, which I found really, really magical. And I have to say, the dancing is better in New York City.
Right,
It
yeah.
really is.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. I often think that one of the real strengths that New York has today, when we consider the broader state of dance music culture in New York, which is relatively strong, I think it's at its best when it really draws from that heritage
I
and
agree.
brings in
Yep.
that generation and rubs that generation against the new generation and creates something new, because like the energy that that generation brings is very different to what you get today from younger folks.
Totally. These are people that are still partying for decades. So, I mean, the thing is, David started his party in 1970. We started our party in London in 2003. So, I mean, having a root for nearly 50 years, and people have been coming to a party for nearly 50 years, some of them, or 30 years, or 40 years, or 20 years, or whatever it is.
Right.
There's a whole history there, and then people are bringing there's a bigger sense of community. But the thing that's beautiful is that these communities are budding and developing all around the world as well. So with the Lucky Cloud party starting in 2003, like, we're the oldest people, the people that started it,
Right.
and hopefully that will continue going, just like the New York parties are going, and hopefully all of these parties will continue to grow and to continue to evolve and to keep going.
Amen to that. I have one more question on this theme before we jump into another track.
Yeah.
Obviously, David passed a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
How has it been continuing his legacy with the Loft in New York specifically?
Well, there's a bunch of us that are doing it. So it's a whole collective of people that are doing this. David always wanted his parties to continue. I mean, we had a kind of a trial with Lucky Cloud because he stopped coming to Lucky Cloud in 2011. So we kind of experienced this first in a weird way. David's presence was still on the planet, but we had to do the party without him. And so we kind of made our way and figured it out without him, because it wasn't like one day he just said, I'm not coming anymore. It just kind of starts to happen. He wasn't able to come for this party, and then he couldn't come to the next party, and things like that. David always wanted these parties to continue. And he always said that nobody owns the loft, and nobody does. It's a community, it's a spirit, it's a feeling. The loft is a feeling, is another thing that he would say. And he didn't even feel like he owned it. He said he was the caretaker. And there's many caretakers of the loft here in New York. It's a collective group effort. And this is an effort that continues and that we will hand on to the next generation. I think what we should talk more about is David's legacy. And David's legacy, so many people talk about, the records that he played, which of course we put on the Loft compilations, and that they're really important, and the fact that he supported these records is very important. Of course, what he did for sound systems and elevating people's experience on the dance floor with better sound is very important. It's something that I think is really taking root around the world right now with more audiophile systems. But I think his greatest contribution is the sense of community. And I honestly feel this way. I feel this way about Lucky Cloud. I feel this way about the parties in Japan. I feel this way about the parties we do in Italy with Last Note. And obviously I feel that way about the parties here in New York City. These are families.
Right.
And they're deeply rooted. And it's about the community first and foremost, more than any record that's played, more than any kind of cartridge that you're using or any kind of speaker. That is number one. And that is the greatest legacy that David has left us. And this is something that should continue to evolve. And I hope our children, take it on and they keep it going in this kind of positive kind of ethos.
You're right. Amen. Once again. All right. You want to?
Yeah, I thought I'd play. Yeah, this is the last track we're going to play, and it's something that I just got sent, and it's something I heard that I thought, why don't we play something that's new and very, very, very recent? But it also does tie into the Loft, as we were just saying. There's one track that was played that David used to play that I absolutely loved in the early 90s by an Italian producer by the name of Don Carlos. And it was a song called Alone. And this, I think, is a different version. He's called it Alina. But it sounds like Alone, but it's a new version, and I just think it's absolutely gorgeous. I think he's a phenomenal producer, and I thought this was kind of a nice way to close the show with something that's really quite new.
Well, I'll just end by saying it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Colleen. I really enjoyed our chats. Thank you so much for coming in.
And thank you so much for having me, and thank you for being on my radio show, too, on Worldwide FM as well.
It's been awesome. Yeah.
A pleasure to meet you and to hang out.
I'll see you in London.
See you in London.
All right.
All right. Take care.